Imagine you wished someone would become wiser, right? According to a pair of ancient Greek con artists, that single wish means you want them dead. Right? Here's the argument. You want a young man named Cleinias to become wise, but Cleinias is not yet wise, so you want him to become what he is not. To become what is not means to become nothing, to cease existing entirely. Therefore, anyone who wishes another person wise wishes that person dead. That sounds absurd. It is absurd. And yet, when this argument was presented in a crowded Athenian gymnasium, the audience burst into applause. They thought it was brilliant. Plato wrote this scene around 380 BCE in a dialogue called the Euthydemus, and he wrote it as a warning about what happens when a society can no longer distinguish genuine reasoning from clever fraud. 2,400 years later, the warning still applies. Today, we're going to understand what real philosophical dialogue requires and what it demands from everyone involved by watching it fail spectacularly. First in comedy, then in tragedy. Socratic dialogue is not a debate, it's not a lecture, it's not two speakers delivering rival speeches while an audience picks a winner. It operates sentence by sentence. One person asks a question, another gives an answer. That answer generates the next question. Through this process, a single broad question, what is justice? What is virtue? Fractures into smaller, more precise sub-questions. And these sub-questions turn out to be far harder than the original. You might think you know what virtue is until someone asks whether virtue can be taught. That forces you to ask whether virtue is a kind of knowledge, and that forces you to define knowledge itself. Each step reveals how much lies hidden beneath the surface of the original question. The process is slow, painstaking, and collaborative. Both participants must think. Both must follow the argument wherever it leads, even when the destination proves uncomfortable. This method has specific requirements or preconditions that must hold before it can function at all. When those preconditions are absent, the dialogue collapses. And Plato, with extraordinary dramatic precision, shows us exactly what that collapse looks like. 3 preconditions make Socratic dialogue possible. The first, a willingness to ask and answer questions in a disciplined turn-by-turn format. This is the direct antithesis of rhetorical speech-making, where each side delivers a long oration and the audience applauds whichever speaker proves more impressive. In Socratic dialectic, from the Greek for conversation, each exchange must be short, precise, and responsive to what came before. No grandstanding, no evasion. The second, the goal must be truth, not verbal victory. If a participant seeks only to demonstrate cleverness or to win regardless of whether the conclusion is correct, the dialogue cannot function. It becomes a contest rather than a collaboration. The third, genuine mental exertion from all participants, not just the one asking questions. Dialogue is collaborative intellectual labor. The person answering must genuinely grapple with each question, not guess, not deflect, not recite memorized formulas absorbed from a previous teacher. Remove any one of these 3 pillars, and the entire structure of genuine inquiry collapses. Keep all 3 firmly in mind. We're about to watch each one fail. One more concept before we enter the dialogues. Several of Plato's works are what scholars call aporetic, from the Greek aporia, meaning puzzlement or impasse. These dialogues appear to end in failure. Socrates and his interlocutor investigate a question, what is courage, what is piety, and arrive at no conclusion. Many readers take this at face value. Plato must be saying the subject cannot be known. Resist that reading. When a Platonic dialogue fails to reach a conclusion, the failure points to a deficiency in the interlocutor, not the subject matter. Return to the dramatic situation. Examine how the interlocutor approached the problem. The source of failure becomes visible. Now we need a crucial distinction. and the difference between a sophist and a philosopher. And this is not a technical distinction. It's a moral one. A sophist says what he thinks his audience will believe. Socrates says what he thinks is true. A sophist teaches because he is paid. Socrates teaches because it benefits the learner. Sophists treat language as a tool for personal advancement. Philosophy treats language as a vehicle for discovering truth. The sophists of 5th century Athens made specific promises to their students. They taught that traditional moral standards were dispensable, mere conventions, not natural facts. They taught that persuasion was a learnable craft, a technique in Greek, available to anyone willing to pay, and that they taught their students to deploy that craft in the courts, the political assemblies, any arena where speech could be converted into influence and power. Sophists placed speech in the service of power. Plato's entire philosophical project was the reverse, placing power in the service of truth. The sophists were widely considered corruptors of Athenian youth, men who taught the young to argue any position, regardless of its truth, and to treat moral tradition as irrelevant. This reputation was not entirely undeserved. A generation trained in sophistic rhetoric could debate with great skill while possessing no genuine understanding of justice, courage, or the common good. Remember this charge of corruption. It matters enormously. The same accusation will later be leveled against Socrates himself by citizens who cannot tell the difference between a philosopher who seeks truth and a sophist who performs cleverness. That confusion will cost Socrates his life. Now we enter the first dialogue, the Euthydemus. Plato wrote it as a comedy, and the setup is rich with irony. Two brothers arrive in Athens, Dionysiodorus and Euthydemus, presenting themselves as teachers of wisdom and virtue. Their previous career, weapons handling and armor instruction, physical combat taught for money. They switched to verbal argumentation because it was more lucrative and more fashionable. The irony is pointed. Men with no intellectual training whatsoever have simply decided to enter the business of teaching wisdom. Their method is called Eristic, from the Greek eris, meaning strife or contention. Eristic is a sophistical technique that traps opponents in apparent logical contradictions by exploiting the natural ambiguities of language. It is not an honest search for truth. It is a performance, a display of verbal cleverness designed to dazzle an audience and humiliate an opponent. The brothers are about to demonstrate it on a teenager. The scene takes place at the Lyceum, one of Athens' public gymnasia. Socrates is present with Cleinias, a promising young man. The brothers step forward. Euthydemus opens with a question to Cleinias. When people learn things, is it the wise who learn or the ignorant? While Cleinias considers this, Dionysiodorus leans over to Socrates and whispers, with a grin, that whichever answer the boy gives, they'll refute him. Pause to appreciate this moment. The less intelligent brother presumes to explain the trick to Socrates. Cleinias answers, the wise learn. The brothers pounce. When students go to a teacher, they go because they don't yet know the subject. So it's the ignorant who learn, not the wise. Cleinias shifts his answer. Fine, the ignorant learn. The brothers pounce again. In a classroom, who grasps the lesson? The quick students or the slow ones? The quick, wise ones. So the wise learn, not the ignorant. The boy is trapped. The brothers celebrate. The crowd applauds. Notice what has happened. The brothers never once defined wise or learn. They exploited the fact that both words carry multiple meanings and shifted between those meanings mid-argument. This is the precise opposite of Socratic dialectic, where insisting on clear definitions is always the starting point. Now that we have the framework, let's watch it shatter in detail. First in comedy, then in tragedy. The brothers' technique reaches its full absurdity with the argument from the opening, now examined in detail. Dionysiodorus turns to address the entire group gathered at the Lyceum. All of you present. You want Cleinias to become wise, correct? Everyone agrees, of course they do. Dionysiodorus constructs a chain of reasoning. You want Cleinias to become wise, but Cleinias is not currently wise. Therefore, you want him to become what he is not. But what is not does not exist. To become what does not exist is to cease existing. And to cease existing is to perish. Therefore, all of you who claim to care about this boy's education, who profess to wish him well, you wish him dead? The crowd erupts in applause once more. This argument has the surface structure of valid logic. Each step appears to follow from the one before it. But the entire chain rests on a single deliberate equivocation, a trick hidden inside the most common verb in any language, the verb to be. The verb to be performs two fundamentally different jobs. In Greek and in English, the first job is attribution, assigning a quality to a subject. Cleinias is wise means Cleinias possesses the property of wisdom. The is here connects a subject to a quality it has. The second job is identity, equating one thing with another. Cleinias is Cleinias means one entity is the same as itself. The is here declares two references to be identical. These are completely different logical operations, but the brothers collapse them. Right? When they say Cleinias is not wise, they treat is not as if it means is nothing, as if failing to possess a quality is the same as failing to exist at all. That conflation of attribution and identity is the engine driving the entire argument. Once you see it, the chain dissolves. Becoming wise, acquiring a new property, has nothing to do with moving from existence to non-existence. But if you cannot see the conflation, and the Athenian crowd cannot, the argument appears unanswerable. Nearly every Eristic demonstration the brothers perform in this dialogue depends on this same equivocation. Now Plato delivers his most devastating critique of Eristic, not through philosophical argument, but through dramatic action. A young man named Ctesippus has been watching the brothers from the sidelines. He is romantically attached to Cleinias and increasingly furious at their treatment of him. After merely listening to a few rounds of their technique, Ctesippus jumps into the conversation and begins deploying the same style of fallacious argument against the brothers themselves, and he does it competently on his first attempt. The crowd applauds him just as readily as they applauded Euthydemus and Dionysiodorus. This moment is Plato's most devastating point about Eristic, made entirely through dramatic action rather than exposition. Eristic requires no philosophical training whatsoever. Anyone of even modest intelligence can pick it up through bare observation. You watch, you imitate, you perform. The contrast with genuine dialectic could not be sharper. No one simply steps into a conversation and begins performing authentic philosophical inquiry. Dialectic demands years of disciplined practice, learning how to define terms precisely, how to identify hidden premises, how to follow chains of reasoning to their true conclusions, rather than to applause lines. Eristic demands nothing except willingness to exploit linguistic ambiguity. One can be learned in an afternoon. The other requires a lifetime. And a crowd that cannot tell the difference rewards them equally. Between the rounds of Eristic, Socrates intervenes with something entirely different. He delivers what the Greeks called a protreptic, from the verb meaning to turn toward. A protreptic is an exhortation, a speech designed to turn someone toward the philosophical life, toward genuine virtue and wisdom. Socrates urges young Cleinias to pursue real understanding rather than the verbal tricks on display around him. The tone shifts abruptly from farce to moral seriousness. The shift is deliberate. Plato refuses to let the Euthydemus become pure comedy. Even surrounded by intellectual fraud, Socrates maintains his core mission, the care of the soul. The protreptic passages remind both Cleinias and the reader that the stakes extend beyond entertainment, How to live well is never a joke, even when the people discussing it are clowns. The Euthydemus ends with the apparent triumph of Eristic. Return now to our 3 preconditions and check each one. Disciplined, question and answer, absent. When Socrates tries to draw necessary distinctions between attribution and identity, between different senses of a single term, the brothers stamp their feet and insist he answer only with unqualified yes or no. They refuse the very discipline the method requires. Truth as the goal, absent. The brothers seek only verbal victory. They celebrate contradictions as triumphs rather than problems to be resolved. They have no interest in whether their conclusions are correct. Mental exertion from all participants, absent. Eristic requires no genuine intellectual effort. Ctesippus proved this by mastering the technique through observation alone. Every precondition is missing, the dialogue cannot function. Socrates delivers his final words to the brothers with devastating irony. He praises their argumentative ability as tremendously valuable and advises them to keep it secret, to share it only with each other. The implication: their reasoning is dangerous to the city and useless for genuine understanding. A philosophical dead end dressed in the costume of wisdom. But the deepest irony concerns the audience itself. The Athenian citizens who applaud these performances cannot distinguish a sound argument from a fraudulent one. These same citizens, this same democratic public that rewards empty cleverness, will later condemn Socrates to death. The real corruptors of youth are not the philosophers, but the public that cannot tell philosophy from its counterfeit. The Euthydemus shows dialogue destroyed by deliberate bad faith, con artists who never intended to seek truth. The Meno shows something subtler and perhaps more dangerous, dialogue destroyed by miseducation. Meno is a student of Gorgias, arguably the greatest teacher of rhetoric in the Greek world. 2 aspects of Gorgias' teaching matter for what follows. First, Gorgias defined terms by listing examples rather than identifying the essential qualities shared by all examples. Second, Gorgias openly disclaimed any interest in teaching virtue. He laughed at people who asked him about it and declared that his business was making clever speakers, not good men. Gorgias placed speech in the service of personal power. The result: Meno possesses the appearance of knowledge without its reality, eloquence without understanding, confidence without competence. Meno opens with an ambitious question: can virtue be taught? Socrates stops him. He cannot answer that question because he does not know what virtue is. Before asking whether virtue is teachable, they must first define it. This demand for definition is one of the most important methodological principles in all of Plato's philosophy. When Socrates asks Meno to define virtue, Meno offers an enumeration. The virtue of a man is to manage the city's affairs capably. The virtue of a woman is to manage the household well. Then there's the virtue of generals, soldiers, children, the aged, slaves, the free, each with its own separate description. This is Gorgias' method, definition by listing examples. Socrates rejects it immediately. Listing instances of virtue no more defines virtue than listing even numbers defines what even means. What Socrates demands is something fundamentally different, a formal definition, a single property that every instance of the thing possesses and that only instances of that thing possess. Here is the difference made concrete. To define an even number using Meno's approach, list examples 2, 18, 104, 56, and so on indefinitely. This can never succeed. The integers are infinite. No enumeration will ever be complete. Using Socrates' approach, an even number is a number divisible by 2 with no remainder. That single statement captures every even number that exists or will ever exist and excludes everything that is not 1, complete, precise, universal. Socrates applies the same standard throughout Plato's dialogues. He defines shape as the limit of a solid. a formulation covering every possible enclosed figure, regardless of its particular form. The knowledge Plato prizes above all other kinds is mathematical knowledge, the paradigm of pure, certain understanding. All inquirers arrive at the same truths about triangles and arithmetic, regardless of culture, status, or personal opinion. Plato demands that our understanding of moral concepts, virtue, justice, courage, achieve the same rigor as mathematics. Meno reluctantly tries a definition. Virtue, he says, is acquiring good things. Socrates presses, what kind of good things? Gold and silver, Meno answers. This reveals the poverty of his understanding, conceiving of good entirely in terms of wealth and status, with no reference to qualities of the soul like justice, temperance, or courage. Socrates dismantles the definition with two questions. If someone acquires gold through theft and injustice, is that virtuous? No. If someone achieves justice and temperance without acquiring any gold, is that virtuous? Yes. The definition fails both criteria. Not every acquisition of good things is virtuous. Method matters, and virtue can exist entirely without material acquisition. Meno grows frustrated. He compares Socrates to a torpedo fish, the electric ray that numbs anyone who touches it. He claims he could speak confidently about virtue to large audiences before this conversation. Now he can say nothing. Notice what this reveals: laziness, smugness, complacency. He resents the process of inquiry rather than recognizing it as progress toward genuine understanding. Then Meno deploys a sophistic argument, a verbal dodge furnished by his education under Gorgias. The paradox of inquiry: how can anyone search for what they don't know? If you already know, you don't need to search. If you don't know, you can't search. You wouldn't recognize the answer, even if you stumbled upon it. Therefore, inquiry is impossible. This sounds clever. It is designed to sound clever. But its real function is to rationalize intellectual complacency, to provide a philosophical sounding excuse for the refusal to think. It is Eristic dressed in a different costume. Socrates counters with one of Plato's most famous doctrines, anamnesis or recollection. The soul is immortal and undergoes reincarnation. Between lives, it possesses complete knowledge of all truths. Before each rebirth, the soul drinks from the waters of forgetfulness. All learning is therefore recollection, not acquisition of something new, but recovery of what was already known. To demonstrate, Socrates turns to one of Meno's slave boys. The boy speaks Greek, the shared language of rational discourse or logos, but has never studied geometry and, crucially, has never been miseducated by any sophist. Through questioning alone, Socrates guides the boy to discover a correct geometric relationship involving the diagonal of a square. He never supplies an answer. The boy gives wrong answers first, and the refutation of those false beliefs is itself the essential pedagogical step. The correct answer emerges from the boy's own reasoning. The contrast with Meno is devastating. An uneducated slave succeeds precisely where the student of Greece's greatest rhetorician fails. The slave boy has no pseudo-knowledge blocking his path. His mind is open to genuine inquiry. Meno's is sealed shut by his education. Despite the demonstration, Meno refuses to continue the inquiry. He has learned nothing. The trajectory of the entire dialogue has been one of steady descent. From Meno's confident opening question, through his rejected enumeration, through his failed definitions, through his frustrated retreat into the paradox of inquiry, to this moment of outright refusal. The slave boy episode stands as a brief upward spike, a glimpse of what genuine inquiry achieves when its preconditions are met, but Meno cannot be reached. Then the dialogue takes its darkest turn. A man named Anytus enters, wealthy, politically influential, a representative of Athens' ruling class. He will later become one of Socrates' 3 accusers at a trial that ends in execution. Anytus mistakes Socrates for a sophist and accuses him of corrupting the youth. The very confusion Plato has been dramatizing now appears in the person who will help kill the philosopher. Socrates attempts dialectic with Anytus. Anytus proves entirely impervious. Socrates presses, if the city's politicians educate so effectively, why is Athens in such poor moral condition? Anytus responds with threat, not argument. Don't disparage great men. It is much easier in this city for a man to do harm than to do good. This confrontation between Socrates and Anytus crystallizes one of Plato's most persistent themes, the disjunction between knowledge and political power. Consider where each character stands. Socrates possesses genuine philosophical understanding, but has no political authority. He cannot protect himself from prosecution, let alone reform the city. Anytus wields enormous political power, but possesses no philosophical understanding. He cannot distinguish a beneficial teacher from a destructive one, and his ignorance is backed by the full force of Athenian law. Meno sits below both, low in knowledge, low in power, and too miseducated to improve. But the slave boy, though equally powerless and formally uneducated, possesses something Meno does not. He is educable. His mind remains open to genuine learning precisely because no sophist has filled it with counterfeit knowledge. And then there is the empty quadrant, the figure Plato will later call the philosopher king. High knowledge and high power united in a single person. This figure does not appear in the Meno or the Euthydemus. The philosopher king is an ideal developed in the Republic. Plato's attempt to imagine a world where knowledge and authority are no longer opposed. The tragedy of Athens, as Plato diagnoses it, is exactly this separation. Those who understand how to live well have no power to implement that understanding. Those who hold power have no understanding worth implementing. Philosophy and the city stand at war. Socrates arrives at an ostensible conclusion. If no one successfully teaches virtue, not the sophists, not the politicians, then virtue cannot be a form of knowledge. Its origin must lie elsewhere, perhaps with the gods. He turns to Meno and declares him a blessed and divinely favored man, since his remarkable virtue must have been granted as a divine gift. The layered irony is unmistakable. Socrates is implying the precise opposite of what he says. Meno possesses no genuine virtue. His apparent accomplishments rest on rhetoric, not understanding. Then comes the dialogue's final devastating moment. Socrates asks Meno to go and persuade Anytus that Socrates means no harm to Athens, that he is not a corrupter of youth. He entrusts this urgent message of reconciliation to a man he has spent an entire dialogue exposing as incapable of genuine communication. The request is impossible. Meno cannot persuade Anytus of anything true because Meno cannot reason his way to truth. Communication has broken down entirely. Socrates' life is now in danger. History confirms the consequences. The trial, the conviction, the hemlock, 2 dialogues, 2 failures, and 1 question that has not aged a day. We now understand what genuine Socratic inquiry is by having seen clearly what it is not. It is not eristic, contentious wordplay that refuses serious intellectual engagement and that any bystander can master in an afternoon. It is not rigid attachment to political convention backed by threats of prosecution, as Anytus embodies, and it is not the pursuit of personal advancement dressed in the language of wisdom. As Meno's entire career demonstrates, genuine philosophical dialogue requires disciplined exchange, question and answer, step by careful step. It requires a shared commitment to truth over victory, no matter how uncomfortable the truth proves. And it requires the willingness to do the hard work of thinking through each step honestly, even when the conclusions threaten cherished assumptions. A society that cannot distinguish real inquiry from its counterfeits, that applauds the Eristic brothers and condemns Socrates, Is a society in profound danger? Not because it lacks clever people. It has those in abundance, but because it cannot tell cleverness from wisdom. Plato's question to us is direct. Does our own public discourse reward genuine truth-seeking, or does it reward the performance of truth-seeking? The Athenians answered that question when they executed the one man among them who refused to stop asking it.